Hello, I'm António Fernandes. I'm a researcher at Mountain Research Center from Instituto Politécnico of Bragança, Portugal. And I'm presenting the paper Generations X, Y, and Z and Sustainable Attitudes and Behaviors Relate to Food Purchasing, a quantitative and cross-sectional study. The presentation is organized into 4 sections, namely Introduction, Methodology, Results, and Conclusion. In the contemporary scenario, social dynamic is a reflection of high modernity which unfolds throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, outlining significant transformations in the interactions between generations X, Y, and Z, as well as their relationship with the environment and consumer issues. The concept of generation implies a thorough analysis of the socioeconomic, cultural, and historical conditions of a group of people who may become a cohesive generation with typical behaviors that are possible for generalization and identification of trends. Achieving sustainable food systems is a complex challenge that requires structural and cultural efforts, as well as changes in consumption, such as the adoption of products that preserve the environment. Advocating the adoption of environmentally friendly food consumption behaviors, such as choosing products manufactured in an eco-friendly manner, is seen as a viable means of moving towards sustainable development. There is no consensus in the literature regarding the existence of generation differences related to sustainable attitudes and behaviors. Instead, emerging evidence about Generation Z suggests that individuals from this generation possess strong environmental beliefs and attitudes, but tend to engage in limited ways in actual environmental practices. Thus, this research aimed to analyze attitudes and sustainable purchasing behaviors when purchasing food among Portuguese consumers of generations Z, Y, and X. Specifically, to identify statistically significant differences on the interest in ecological knowledge, level of knowledge of ecological issues, ecological purchasing habits, and conscious purchasing planning, and consequently sustainable attitudes and behaviors when purchasing food, considering the generation factor. To achieve these objectives, a quantitative and cross-sectional approach was used. In this context, a questionnaire was used to collect the data. The socioeconomic variables considered were gender, age, education level, monthly income level, household size, and family financial comfort. Sustainable attitudes and behaviors included 17 statements that were later aggregated into 4 dimensions, namely interest in ecological knowledge, level of knowledge of ecological issues, ecological purchasing habits, and conscious purchasing planning. For each statement, respondents used the Likert type scale ranging from 1, I completely disagree, to 7, I completely agree. The questionnaire was sent to participants via Google Docs form between September 2022 and the first fortnight of January 2023. Thus, primary data was collected based on a non-probabilistic sample for convenience that includes 686 Portuguese consumers from Generation Z, Y, and X. The IBM SPSS statistics software was used to perform the data treatment. Firstly, the data analysis involved the calculation of absolute and relative frequencies for qualitative variables and central tendency and dispersion measures for superior or quantitative variables. The internal consistency of the study dimensions was assessed by calculating the Cronbach alpha coefficient. To identify statistically significant differences between Generation Z, Y, and X for the dimensions described earlier, the Kruskal-Wallis test was used. Furthermore, the Mann-Whitney test was applied to perform the multiple median comparison in order to identify which groups had similar and/or different sustainable attitudes and behaviors. When analyzing gender distribution, it is observed the interesting variations between generations. In fact, in Generation X, 64.1% of the respondents are female and 35.9% are male. In Generation Y, the majority of participants are female, representing 73.2% of total, while in Generation Z, female make up 61.4% of the sample. Regarding the marital status, in both Generation X and Generation Y, a significant part of the participants is married or live in cohabitation, representing 67.5% and 56.1% respectively. However, in Generation Z, the vast majority of participants are single. The analysis of the education level reveals an upward trend towards higher education between the older generation and the intermediate generation. In fact, in Generation X, the majority of participants have higher education. This proportion increases to 61% in Generation Y. In Generation Z, this percentage decreases, reaching 36.1%. In fact, the predominant education level in this generation is the secondary education or equivalent. Regarding the family monthly income level, the sample presents notable diversity. In fact, in Generation X, most of participants are included in the income category of 1,411 to 2,115 euros. Among Generation Y, the category of 705 to 1,410 euros is more common. In Generation Z, the majority of participants have a family monthly income level of less than 705 euros, indicating a different economic reality between generations. The three generations showed some differences in family structure, with Generation Y standing out for having the highest proportion of families with 2 people, while Generation Z had a substantial proportion of families with 3 people. Additionally, Generation Z reported a higher prevalence of living comfortably financially, indicating a higher level of financial comfort compared to previous generations. Finally, measures of central tendency and dispersion for age in each generation provide valuable information about age characterization. Generation X has an average age of 50.9 years old, while in Generation Y the average is 37.3 years old, and in Generation Z the average age drops to 21.5 years old. As shown in Table 2, the Cronbach alpha coefficient values were satisfactory for all dimensions, indicating good internal consistency, varying between 0.7 and 0.8 for the dimensions knowledge of ecological issues, ecological purchasing habits, conscious purchasing planning, and sustainable attitudes and behaviors, and very good with values greater than 0.9 for the dimension interest in the ecological knowledge. With regard to interest in ecological knowledge, Generation X stands out as the most, with a mean of 5.27, demonstrating a high level of involvement with ecological issues. Furthermore, Generation Z records the lowest average in this dimension with 4.78, although the degree of interest in ecological knowledge is relevant. As for knowledge of ecological issues, Generation X, once again, leads with the highest mean reaching 5.26. On the other hand, Generation Y has the lowest knowledge but still high with a mean of 5.18. In what concerns to ecological purchasing habits, Generation X stands out with a mean of 4.91, reflecting a high level of adoption of sustainable purchasing practices. Generation Z, in turn, had the lowest average in this dimension with 4.19, although it still represents a moderate level. Within the scope of conscious purchasing planning, Generation X again presented the highest score, recording a mean of 5.47, which points to conscious purchasing planning at a very high level. Generation Z, although with the lowest average, maintains a good level of conscious planning with an average of 5.23. Regarding the sustainable attitudes and behaviors dimension, once again, Generation X stands out with an average of 5.19, indicating a very positive attitude towards sustainable attitudes and behaviors. Generation Z has the worst score in this dimension, but still good, with a mean of 4.71, showing an equally positive ecologic attitude. As shown in Table 3, the knowledge of ecological issues, as well as conscious purchasing planning, is the same in the three generations. However, it can be seen that there are statistically significant differences between the generations regarding the interest in ecological knowledge, ecological purchasing habits, and sustainable attitudes and behaviors when purchasing food. Furthermore, the mean ranks reveal the Generation X as the generation with greater interest in ecological knowledge, more ecological purchasing habits, and more sustainable attitudes and behaviors as opposed to Generation Z. To identify which groups were different from each other, the man-Whitney test was used. The results of the multiple median comparison using all possible combinations of sample pairs are shown in Table 4. Generations X and Y have equal interest in ecological knowledge, the same ecological purchasing habits, and similar sustainable attitudes and behaviors when purchasing food. However, differences were identified between generation Z and Y, as well as between generation Z and X. In summary, there are no statistically significant differences between generations X and Y, but differences were identified between generation Z and generations Y and X. Based on the results, it can be stated that the generations with the greatest interest in ecological knowledge, with ecological purchasing habits and superior sustainable attitudes and behaviors, are generations X and Y. The results confirm that generation is a differentiating factor of sustainable attitudes and behaviors. In fact, the existence of statistically significant differences between generations Z, Y, and X regarding the interest in ecological knowledge, ecological purchasing habits, and sustainable attitudes and behaviors when purchasing food are proof of this. Furthermore, it was found that generations X and Y had identical attitudes and behaviors, differentiating them from Generation Z. Regarding the level of knowledge of ecological issues and conscious purchasing planning, attitudes were similar in the three generations analyzed. Thus, the originality of this research lies in presenting a new perspective on sustainable attitudes and behaviors when purchasing food by comparing generations Z, Y, and X, contributing to the debate of the relationship between consumer behavior and sustainability issues. Thank you for your attention.